perfectly. So, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. The stream is put on, so we can continue in our conference with the second session of external expert talks and speeches. And I would like to invite and welcome and also introduce our first speaker in this session, who is Jaroň Bedrošová, and she comes from Interdisciplinary Research Team on Internet and Society from the Faculty of Social Studies in Masaryk University in Brno. And this first contribution will be about children's and adolescents' experience with cyber aggression. So the floor is yours. Go ahead.
Okay, hello, thank you very much for the introduction. So I will just skip the first few slides. As you heard, I'm part of the IRTIS team, in which we focus on many interesting topics, not only cyber aggression. So if you are interested in it, and you also heard a bit about it from my colleague in one of the previous sessions, you can check out our website and find many interesting research there. But let's move on to my topic, which is cyber aggression. So in my talk today, I will start by briefly defining and conceptualizing cyber aggression and talking about what it is. And then I will be more specifically talking about two types of cyber aggression, cyberbullying and cyber hate, and what makes them similar, what makes them different. And for these two experiences, I will show you some data from European and Czech Republic projects, EU Kids Online, you already heard about this one, and the Czech project Future. So let's start with cyber aggression. You can see some definitions. I will talk a bit about them, but please don't worry, it will be very brief. So to beginning, usually we use the term cyber aggression, sometimes online aggression. These two are synonyms as rather general terms that describe any type of behavior which is aimed at harming another person using information and communication technologies such as the internet or digital devices, and that is perceived by the target or by the victims as aversive. And similar definition is also given by the Council of Europe. They write about cyber violence, but basically this is another synonym to cyber aggression or online aggression. And you can see in the definition that it's, again, a very wide range of behaviors that can be included here. So different types of harmful behaviors that can result in different forms of harms. It can be physical, psychological harm, but also, for example, economic harm. And it's important to understand this broad range of negative behaviors that can happen online and that are defined as cyber aggression. As I said, there are many synonyms for this type of behavior, so aggression, harassment, violence, online, cyber. I will be mostly using the term cyber aggression or online aggression, but in a lot of academic literature or in media and public discourse, you can hear also the other synonyms for it, and they are basically defining the same thing. What is important to understand is that these are big umbrella terms. They refer to general types of online behaviors that can take different forms, and they can cause different harms, that they may have different motivations. So within such broad cyber aggression category, there are many specific forms and manifestations of cyber aggression, and these are specific, distinct, and they each have specific characteristics and usually specific motivations. So for example, you can see some examples on the slide. Some form of cyber aggression is cyberbullying, but this can be very different from other forms of cyber aggression. For example, online scams or outing, identity theft. Sometimes it can be similar, but sometimes it leads to a very different form of harm, psychological or economic harm. So it is quite important to acknowledge these differences. And why am I talking about this so much? Because we often encounter problems with this conceptualization, and both in academic literature and in public and media discourse, these terms are often used as synonyms or interchangeably. And here I'm talking especially about cyber hate and cyberbullying. So often you can read something about cyber aggression or cyberbullying, but it's not really clear whether it is really cyberbullying or it's just more general form of online negative behavior. And that's why I will continue a bit more with some definitions for these two specific types of behavior. And I will show you what makes them similar, but what makes them different. because I think that understanding these differences is important, because it allows us to design more precise and more targeted prevention and intervention strategies. And even though I will not be talking much about prevention today, I will only briefly mention it at the end of my presentation. I hope that the theory I will be talking about and the empirical evidence I will be showing to you will inspire you to think a bit more about it. What makes difference in these types of harmful behaviors? But let's stay with the more general approach at the beginning. And that's the question whether cyber aggression and traditional or offline aggression are related or not. And I think you can all probably guess, and you probably know from your own experience, that yes, they are interrelated. And there's actually a big interconnection between online and offline life in general, not just in the case of aggression. We can consider cyberspace as a social environment. It's not only digital environment, it's an important aspect of our everyday life and our everyday interactions. And even though what happens there can be virtual, digital, it is very much real in the real life consequences and experiences we have there. In terms of aggression, and especially bullying and cyberbullying, in research, we often see that one incident can happen in multiple environments at once. So when it happens offline, it usually also happens online and vice versa. And the majority of studies that focus on cyber aggression actually show a substantial overlap of offline and online aggression. Depending on the studies, it can be from 60 to 90% of overlap between these two contexts. And this is why we often call cyber aggression an old wine in a new bottle. This means it's not something new that came from the internet. It's an old form of behavior, but it is new in a way how it happens, through which platform and which technologies it happens. So I hope I did not bore you too much with defining cyber aggression. And now I will be talking more specifically about cyberbullying. So as I said, cyberbullying is one specific type of cyber aggression. And even here, when we are defining cyberbullying in academic literature, we use definitions from traditional and offline school bullying. And to call some behavior bullying, it usually needs to fulfill 3 criteria. And the criteria are that it's intentional behavior which causes harm, it's repetitive or long-term, not just a single incident, and there is some power imbalance, which means that the victims cannot easily defend themselves. And the same criteria apply also to cyberbullying. So when these are not fulfilled, we rather use the term cyber aggression or cyber harassment, which is something more general. It can also be related to single incident without power imbalance. But if these criteria are fulfilled, we talk about cyberbullying. But it's important to consider the different online context, the cyberspace. So what do these criteria mean in the online environment? For example, when we think about the second point, long-term and repetition. When it happens online, in many cases, even one incident can be shared and spread many times. So we can still classify it as cyberbullying. Also, when it's a situation when a bully posts just one insulting or hurtful comment or a social media post, because it usually doesn't disappear and it can come back. So the long-term duration is there somehow. Similarly, we should rethink what the power imbalance means in the cyberspace. Traditionally, this was connected, for example, to physical power or to social status, being rich, being poor. But in the online context, it can also have different connotations. It can mean that the aggressor is anonymous and the victim is non-anonymous, or that the aggressor has higher digital skills than the victim, which makes it hard for the victim to defend himself or herself. But even when I talk about cyberbullying as one specific form of cyber aggression, we cannot say it's one single type of behavior. It can still take many different forms. For example, it can include insults and threats, but also gossip, spreading of some personal or sensitive information or audiovisual materials without consent, but it can also be identity theft. And we should not forget that also social exclusion can be considered part of cyberbullying. So there are many different forms how cyberbullying can happen. Unfortunately, in the public discourse, we often hear and see that many people still believe that when it happens only online, it's not really harmful. It doesn't have any real bad consequences because it happened only on the internet. But that, I'm sure you can guess that's not true. And a lot of studies provided empirical evidence about the detrimental effects on victims of cyberbullying. So I listed some of those. These detrimental effects include problem behaviors, emotional and social problems, lower self-esteem, helplessness, problems at schools and with studying, and many more. And actually, we see that the impact depends on the severity of the attacks, which is why it is important to differentiate cyberbullying from cyber harassment or other forms of cyber aggression, because these might be less severe. They do not fulfill the criteria. There isn't power imbalance. They can present just one single incident, even when it happens online. So this might be less severe. And cyberbullying, with its definition, is actually less common than the other types of cyber aggression. But in the end, it's probably more severe and it has potentially more harmful effects on the victims. And what makes cyber hate different from cyberbullying? Actually, it has very different definition in academic literature. Cyber hate is often also called online hate speech or online hate crimes. And it refers to different types of attacks on someone because of their group membership or group characteristics. And as such, it is quite often motivated by negative stereotypes or prejudice toward some groups or some group categories. The most common targeted group categories in cyber hate are ethnicity, religion, nationality, and sexual orientation. But we also see that cyber hate can attack people because of other group characteristics. For example, their gender, disability, age, or appearance, weight, being overweight. What is a bit different from cyberbullying is that cyber hate can also attack individuals, but it can attack a whole group. So it either attacks a whole group of people, for example, a racist comment about all refugees in general, or it can attack individuals because they belong to some group. So as such, it can take different forms. It can be in the form of private messages, social media posts, but also comments in news discussions on the internet, and in some cases also in extremist websites when they present some content which is stereotypical or untrue or biased depiction of some group characteristics or some groups. In contrast to cyberbullying, therefore, cyber hate doesn't have to be repetitive. There doesn't have to be power imbalance, but it's defined by the bias motivation and by the attacks on the group identity. So sometimes when someone is cyberbullied because of their group membership, for example, because of their sexual orientation, we can say that this incident is also cyber hate and cyberbullying. There is some overlap, but in many times when someone just writes a hateful post on in online discussion, it's a very different form of behavior. We would not call this cyberbullying. But similar to cyberbullying, cyber hate also has a lot of detrimental effects, both on victims, individuals, but also on the society. So for the victims, we know from research that it causes similar emotional, social, and academic problems as cyberbullying, but it also has an additional effect on the rest of people who see such hate on the internet, so not only the victims. And in the whole society, it reinforces discriminatory attitudes. It presents an additional harm for already vulnerable groups in our society. And in general, it increases acceptance of hate and aggression in society and on the internet. Before I move to the last section with some empirical data from our project, I want to define 3 types of roles or 3 types of participants in cyber hate and cyberbullying incidents. So as you can see on the picture, in a cyber hate or cyberbullying incident, there can be the victim, or plural, the victims. Then there can be the aggressors, again, plural or individual aggressors. But the majority of people involved in this are the bystanders or the exposed audience. And I can imagine that probably most of us have been exposed to some online hate or to some online aggression. So we were not the victims, but we saw it happening. And it is important to distinguish these three types of experience. Now I will move to our project results, and I will show you some statistics and numbers for these three types of experiences. So as I said at the beginning, I will be presenting data from two of our projects, and specifically from these two reports that are publicly available. You can download them on our website because they include a lot of other stuff than just cyber hate and cyberbullying. So if you are interested, you can find it there. And the first project you already heard about is the EU Kids Online. I will not stay on this slide very long because you heard it, so I will just say it's a big project in which 19 European countries participated, including the Czech Republic. And one part of the project was a survey that included a lot of questions about online activities, online opportunities, and risks, including some questions about cyber aggression. And these data come from 2017 to 2019, so they are a bit older at this point now. But we are preparing a new EU Kids Online 5 that should collect new data, I think, next year. So there will be some updated new results. But let's start with my topic, and specifically with offline and online or cyberbullying, victimization, and prevalences. On the left side, you see the second row is the children reported being.
Maria, yes. Could you give us 1 second, because I think we have a big lag in connection here. I know, but to repeat, excuse me, just could you repeat the last two sentences because we didn't hear?
Oh, okay, I'm sorry. Yes, I just wanted to point out that you can see a figure about offline bullying victimization and cyberbullying victimization. Left line, and the second row is Czech Republic, and the last row is European average. And about 20% in Czech Republic of children said they were offline victimized at least a few times or more often during the past year. And from these, about 10% said that it happened to them on a monthly basis. And the European average was a bit lower, but very similar. And on the right side, you can see the online, the cyberbullying, and it was a bit less common. So 15% in the Czech Republic was cyber victimized. To 8% it happened on a monthly basis, and a bit less on the European level. And we also looked at the age and gender differences for these victimization experiences. And in both of them, offline and online, the differences were actually very small. So it was not that much dependent on someone's age or gender, but on rather on other factors. And when we are talking about cyberbullying, here I will just talk about the cyberbullying, no more offline bullying. It is also important to ask about the harm. So you can see in this graph, we ask children how upset they were after they experienced some cyberbullying. So you can see that about a fifth of the children who were cyber victimized reported no harm. So that's actually good. It was not that stressful or severe experience for them. But this truly differs based on individual differences and individual characteristics, and also based on the differences in the individual incidents. However, we definitely cannot minimize the cyberbullying consequences because you can also see that about a fifth of the children reported very intense harm after this experience. And there were some gender differences in this case, and girls tended to report more harm after being cyber victimized than boys. Concerning age, there were also some differences, but this was very inconsistent across the countries. So I will not be talking about it today now, but if you are interested in your own country, you can find these data in the report I mentioned. So in some countries, older children felt more harm, but in some other countries, it was the younger children who felt less harm or more harm. And lastly, for cyberbullying, we also asked about aggression, about being the perpetrators of the cyberbullying. And even though we already heard this in previous presentations, we can assume some social desirability bias in the answers, there was still about 7% in the Czech Republic who reported being the aggressors, and 3% reporting being the aggressors on a monthly basis, and very similar numbers for the whole European average. And actually, when we also asked about traditional offline aggression, these numbers were very similar. So there were not many differences between the online and offline world in this case. And also age and gender differences were very small. So we are not interpreting them in a meaningful way. They were like not very important factor in this differentiation. And now the last project I want to talk about, it's the second only Czech project called The Future. And as EU Kids Online, it tackled many different topics, also like the positive side of internet use, the opportunities, the benefits, digital well-being, but a set of questions was about cyber hate. These data were collected in 2021 from almost 3,000 Czech adolescents aged 11 to 16, and also from their parents or caregivers. And I will show you something about the parents at the end of the presentation. So I said we asked them a set of questions about cyber hate. Therefore, in the survey, we provided them some description of what cyber hate is. And it was defined like this: as some hateful content that targets groups of people or individuals on the internet, for example, because of their skin color, religion, nationality, or sexual orientation. And it can take different forms. It can be photos, videos, articles, or online discussions. And you can see on the graph that almost 60% of Czech adolescents reported being exposed to this cyber hate as audience or bystanders. So they were not the victims of these attacks, but they saw them. And almost 16% actually said they were victimized, and 7.5% reported being the aggressors. And actually similar patterns and prevalences are also in other studies from other European countries. So it usually has the same ratio, like majority of young people are exposed, but less are victimized, and even less are the aggressors. This is something we also see for the adults, not only for children and adolescents. But now let's talk a bit more about the exposure experience. So for the majority of adolescents, fortunately, this was not very frequent experience, but actually there was about a tenth of adolescents who reported that they were exposed to some cyber hate on a weekly basis, and 4% on a daily basis. There were some gender differences. Girls reported being exposed slightly more than boys, and also the exposure increased with age during the adolescent period we investigated. And it is also important to say that almost all of the adolescents, 90%, said that they were upset by the experience. So they were upset that they saw some hate, even though they were not the victims. Usually it lasted only for a few minutes or hours, this feeling of being upset, but for a small percentage of adolescents, I don't have the number here, but I think it was 3 or 5%, they felt for weeks or months upset after seeing some hate online. Majority of these exposures was unintentional. This means adolescents encountered some cyber hate during their other online activities, but about 18% of them reported they were intentionally seeking for these contents. So they were searching for some cyber hate, and then they saw it. Then we also wanted to know more about the victimization experience. So in this study, we specifically asked about 3 types of cyber hate victimization, 3 reasons: sexual orientation, race, ethnicity, or nationality, and religion, because these are the most common characteristics that are targeted by cyber hate. So we did not ask about the other ones, but it would be interesting to see it in other studies. And this is what we found out for these 3 categories. About 12% of Czech adolescents were victimized because of their sexual orientation, 8% because of their ethnicity or nationality, and 6% because of their religion. Again, for the majority of them, this happened only once or a few times during the past 6 months when we asked, and there were almost no gender differences. But the victimization experience increased a bit with age. And very similar patterns were also for cyber hate aggression. So The most common reason for attacking someone on the internet was their sexual orientation, then ethnicity, and then religion. But overall, being the aggressor was a less prevalent experience. There were less aggressors in general. And as I said, in this study, we also asked parents and caregivers of the children who participated in our questionnaire whether they actually knew about their children's victimization due to cyber hate. And as you can see, the results show that the majority of the parents didn't know that their child reported to us they were the victim of cyber hate. Only about 11% of them correctly knew that their child was victimized due to sexual orientation, 12% knew about the ethnicity, nationality, and 9% correctly knew about victimization due to religion. So this suggests us that children tend to not tell their parents or their caregivers when they are being victimized online by cyber hate. So this is an important finding, I think. And identified in research on cyberbullying and cyber hate, there's something common in these strategies. They are nothing surprising, but I think it's worth mentioning them because they can be actually quite easily implemented on the school level, I hope. However, despite these general tendencies we can use, it is still important to keep in mind that it's necessary to develop more specific programs that would actually acknowledge the difference between bullying and hate and be tailored for these experiences. For example, when tackling cyber hate, we should focus more about prejudice and stereotypes because these are the motive behind this behavior, and it's not the case for cyberbullying in most of the cases. But back to these general strategies. So systematic reviews and researchers found out that it's generally a good strategy to have a supportive peer and school environment, but also to nurture school and family connections, to have clear and explicit proactive policies and procedures about internet use and cyberbullying or cyber hate. Good strategy is also some empathy and emotional training, promotion of diversity, class coexistence, and peer tutoring, and of course, education in digital literacy and digital skills that could help children improve their skills, such as reporting on or knowing with whom or how to talk when something bad happens to them online. And of course, it's important not to focus only on the victims and aggressors, but also on the bystanders, who are actually the majority of children and adolescents, and to reuse their passive bystanding, their passive behavior, or their support for the bullies and acceptance of the hate. So thank you very much for your attention. This is all I wanted to say in my talk, but I would be very happy to hear your questions and answer them.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Maria. So now's the time for some questions, should you have any, because your presentation was right on time, you kept your schedule. So now we have a little bit of space for questions. Pipa? Yes?
My question is there any data relating to which platforms are the most prevalent for cyberbullying and cyber hate?
I will repeat the question. If there are any data about which platforms are prevalent for the cyberbullying, where it happens the most, that's the question. On which platform it happens the most?
My topic is cyber hate, so I don't have much data about the cyberbullying, but I think you can find something about it in the EU Kids Online report. But for cyber hate, it's usually social media. So it's social media discussions under news articles for the older adolescents and adults, video games sometimes, and I think similar platforms are also for cyberbullying, but this can happen to a greater extent in some private platforms, private messages, whereas hate usually happens in the public forum.
Thank you. I also have a question, because I noticed that you mentioned that 12% of children say that they have been bullied due to their sexual orientation. And I checked quickly the data available, because in my mind there is stuck one number which says that approximately it's 4% of homosexuals or people with different orientation in the population. And you said it has been 12. So I checked it, and I found out that it's expected the numbers are slightly higher than the usual 4%. It says it's about 6% for men around 11 for women, but you have said it's 12, which would mean explicitly that every single child with a different orientation has been harassed in some way. Is that so?
Yes, these are the numbers we had in this survey, but we also need to consider that these were children and adolescents. So basically, they told us they felt victimized because of their sexual orientation, but a lot of them were unsure about their sexual orientation. So it's not a topic that the younger children would actually report us that much. Perhaps a bit more the older children, but yeah. We did not ask them exactly about their sexual orientation, so I think they might give us lesser numbers maybe in this instance, but when we asked them whether they felt victimized by some content targeting sexual orientation, this is the number they told us.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. Yeah. Any other questions? Yes, please.
Hi, thank you very much, Maria. Thank you. I think this was there will be great connections between your and my talk. So that's wonderful the way it was scheduled. But I wanted to ask you, when you talk about cyberbullying and cyber hate, if the cyberbullying has to be done repetitively by one concrete person, or for example, if someone is being repeatedly exposed to some hateful messages because, for example, of their political opinion, and it happens over and over, if that's considered cyberbullying, although it happens from different sources?
That's a complicated question with not an easy answer. Actually, yes, cyberbullying usually happens in some collectives, so it doesn't have to come from one person, but for example, from a class collective, so multiple person, and then it can come back later from other people. But in cyber hate, we usually don't talk about it as cyberbullying, even though one person can see hate towards their group like every other day on a different channel. But this is interesting food for thought. Because it's not discussed like this in the research, but I think it might be well for actually exploring the experiences of people a bit more and to see if they consider it like this and how it actually happens. Yeah.
Okay, great. I'm asking because if you stay longer, you'll see why I'm asking, because it's connected to what we'll be talking about. But thank you very much.
Thank you very much, which leads us to following presentation. Markéta Supá will be our next expert, who will tell us something about underage activism, which leads me to some thought about yesterday's final sessions we had in our team, and we spoke about young YouTubers who have a huge influence on young generation. And these young YouTubers could be considered the activists in a good way, who can do research, who can make the content that is accepted by young generation very well, and they actually can be the best educators to this young generation. So I'm very much looking forward to your contribution, because I want to confirm some of my assumptions and things that I am observing on my family and my children. So, Markéta Supá, do I pronounce your surname well? I was not aware if it is Czech or foreign name, and it will be about underage activism and social networks. The floor is yours. You can share.
I will try to. Sometimes I have issues to share my screen, so just in case I send an email to Lucia with the presentation. Yeah. So I will try just now. Yeah. Sorry. Yeah. So it's not working again. So would it be okay with you if you share the presentation, and I just always tell you to change the slide if that's okay.
So I need to share my screen, which is Google Meet. Here. Okay, so I'm sharing my screen now, and I'm going to open the presentation, right? It's over here, and here.
So you should be able to put on the right. Right. Thank you. Great. Thank you very much. So first of all, I would like to say that I'm not an expert at all on activism, and neither the internet. What I've been my all research is focusing on is the experience of children and youth in media and varied topics. And for some reason, for the past few years, I've been working on this topic. But before it was diversity, or it was media literacy, digital literacy, but it always comes back to one thing, which is I'm interested in the individual children and youth's subjective perspectives and experiences on various topics connected to media. So this project, Youth and Activism and the Internet, again, it's not my expertise, but I think we have gathered some interesting findings and things to think about. So if you could change the slide, please. So what we know so far, and definitely this is not for new about for you, is the role of social media in youth activism. That social media truly can be used in a way that contributes to civic participation and political participation of youth, and feel them and be included in the matters affecting their lives. It helps them to exercise their agency and voice, and learn how to exercise their agency and voice. It influences their civic learning and development and identity development, and it does so in both positive and negative ways. So as we heard before during the day today, we had a lot of talks about, for example, how it affects positively and negatively youth well-being in general, but this same and similar findings can be found about youth that is civically or politically active. There is another strand of research that looks not only what youth and children do with media for civic and political participation, but also how they are represented as civic and political actors. So we can all, can you close? Sorry, I'm sorry, my they are babysitting my small baby. Hopefully everything is fine. So then, so the way that we represent youth activists can be viewed on different ways, but we can approach it also from the theory and practice of exclusion and inclusion. So in the way that we in the social media represent youth activists can be done through the symbolic discursive form of exclusion that prevents youth from participating on society on equal terms. So what we don't know so far, and what I will be talking about, what has our research been about, is how politically active youth subjectively experience, perceive, and approach the symbolic discursive form of social exclusion presented online. The other thing I'll be talking about by the youth, I specifically talk about youth under the age of 18 or just recently turned 18. Because we were interested in the youth that has also limited other ways of how they can politically and civically engage, for example, through traditional ways such as voting. If we can change the slide, please. So this is very. I hear myself, yeah.
Sorry.
No, please. Thank you. Once.
This one, okay.
Yeah,
Sorry.
yeah, thank you very much. So this is a research that had started in, I think, 2020. It has been so long, sorry. It's when my first child was born, and my second was born during all this research. So we had a number of phases, and they were funded from different sources. So the first phase was funded by Primus for early career research at the Jaroň University, and it was an ethnography and digital ethnography. With it took all the field research was almost a year, and it was conducted with Fridays for Future youth-led movement members. So we did an on-site ethnography, and then we also did a digital ethnography when we followed 5 underage Czech activists for 3 months in spring 2022. That was done by one team. Then we had, during the second phase, but from a different research funded from Czech Science Foundation, and then also by other team, we conducted a critical discourse analysis of online media articles and the user comments under these articles. that were about 6 selected Czech underage activists over 8 years. And then the second phase, the recent one that happened during the last year, and we are currently we're just finishing the analysis of the data and preparing the publication, was online Q methodology with 20 political active youth and teens, which were aged 13 to 18 years. But even the 18 years old were reflecting on how it was for them, what was the experience for them as being underage activists in the Czech Republic. So we can, next slide. So just this is, I will not talk about it much. I just wanted to share with you a few pictures from ethnography that you could see. I mean, in the left corner down, you can see, for example, a picture from the focus group. Then we had individual interviews, online, offline, and we also followed the Fridays for Future youth activists during their sessions, meetings, international like gatherings, also their strikes and all the different things we have been doing during the year. The next slide, please. Then the online discourse analysis. So the 6 cases we have selected to reflect different ways of activism and also probably a bit of the different personalities of the activists. Some were individual, but there were also, one was the movement, for example, Let Us Out. But some of them focused on environment, such as Anna and Eliška Velvarové, the sisters, or Jakubček was looking at the work of his local municipality. Alžbětko, he was Extension Rebellion, and then we had Adam Turnečka, who was for EU, and Matěj Gregory was against EU. And Let Us Out, just, it was during the COVID pandemic, and students were against the restrictions of not being able to go to school and going out. You can change the slide, please. And then online Q study. Maybe I don't know how many of you is familiar with Q methodology or Q study. I've been working with method for several years now, and I've really enjoyed, because it really helps us uncover the subjective perspectivity and subjective feelings of children and youth. I mean, it is also with adults, but I mainly use it with children and youth. And it's a mixed method research. It combines both quantitative and qualitative ways of gathering and analyzing and presenting the data, but I will be only presenting it today in a qualitative matter, because I believe because it will be a nice addition to the other service and other things that we have today. So I will focus on the qualitative. But just to tell you a bit more about how is it done. So the important thing about Q methodology is that what we have to do first is to gather concourse, which is the array of communications about the research subjects. What we have done is we have developed 39 statements about what is it to be underage activist. And the sources, we use the ethnography that I talked about, as well as the online discourse about youth activists. And based on that, we have we develop the statements, but sometimes they were really reflecting exactly what has been said about the people, youth activists, or what was their experience. So I just giving you here some examples. So for example, we meddle with things that are none of our business. We have no respect for adults, or people threaten us online. The internet plays an important role in our activities. We are the only force that can bring about real change. Our work is malicious, we are naive, we are weird, and stuff like that. So it was really summarizing and reflecting the key things that have been said about the youth activists online and what they have experienced. So then what they do, we have conducted the interviews with 20 activists online using Zoom, and they were sorting out the statements, firstly, just simply to which degree they agree, disagree, and they have no opinion about, and they sorted the statements on the inverted pyramid. We then analyzed this using by-person factor analysis, but also after they did the skew sorting on the inverted pyramid, we were also conducting post-sorting interviews, asking them about the reasons behind the individual sorts and how they understood the statements and how the experience of the statements was for them. And then we analyzed this using a reflexive thematic analysis. We can next slide. Okay, so we have a lot, of course, a lot of topics and research and findings that I could talk about, but I decided to focus on something that seemed relevant, and I'm quite glad today that I've decided so, because it seems it really fits into today's focus of other presentations. So um, what we had from the ethnography and Q study is that, of course, it confirmed that internet and digital media and online media play a very important role in youth activism. However, they also said it's the best tool we have, but it doesn't mean it's a good tool. And part of the reason why is it not the good tool was that they were really encountering cyber hate. And I've been rewriting cyber hate, cyber aggression, cyberbullying as Maria was speaking on my presentation. So I found it quite funny. So don't take me that this is truly cyber hate or cyberbullying, but I just want to share the voice of the youth and their subjective experience. So, for example, I decided to actually use their quotes to speak for themselves. So, for example, people like started telling me to die and stuff like that, and writing horrible comments on my personal Instagram. And of course, you know that if you share publicly who you are, for example, queer, and then something like in Bratislava, which was the shooting incident in a queer club happens, you don't feel good about what it can bring. So, for example, some youth activists that were very visible were, of course, queer. Well, sorry, of course, were as well queer, and other things. They felt that they were attacked because of their activism as well as for being queer. And other was, for example, saying, putting so much work in this, we are like burnt out. And these people are still like talking us, they are like threatening us, stop briefing. They also said it affects you differently. The negative comments are against Friday for Future or against you personally. If it's you, the person that is being attacked, that it's very hard. So the youth activists were really exposed, especially the ones the more visible online they were, the more attacks they were facing. And especially if, for example, it was obvious, as Maria said, for example, they were queer or had other sexual orientation or other things that they could attack them on them personally. But they also reflected the online representation of them and how it was bothering them and how they were facing difficulties connected to this. So, for example, some journalists are following us on personal accounts on Twitter and Instagram. So we just have to be like a bit careful and trying to be like so professional, forgetting we are just activists, children and young people, instead trying to be so serious. Or another said, whatever we say online can be used against us. So finding the balance between representing us in a good way while not giving the other side an opportunity to abuse it is hard. And then I think the majority encounters negative representation of youth activism rather than positive representation. So they were talking really how they can balance their self-representation in ways that is positive and reinforcing for them, but also for the other youth. But at the same time, how it can be used against them in the comments, in the online articles, and so on. So next slide, please. So then when we look at an online public discourse, and especially the comments sections under the articles about the selected youth activists, what we have discussed, what we have found is that they were really, very common thing was there's in the comments, the attackers, or how we can call them, were singling out the activists and their individual characteristics. So rather than, they were also talking about Fridays for Future or other movements in collective ways, but very often trying to single out someone who was representing the movement, attacking them. And some of the activists were also not part of any movements and were facing this hate. So one of the ways they were attacking was body shaming and misgendering based on physical appearance. So, for example, talking about Jakubček, I thought there was some girl in the picture, and look, he's a little boy. Or saying about his physical appearance, arms like steak, he should do some sports, play football with friends if he has any. I thought based on the photos that he was some ugly female feminist. So rather than really talking about what youth stands for, they were really attacking their individual personalities and characteristic. And also using sexism and sexual norms were in play. For example, if I just use some, they talk about generation who can't even decide what sex they have, but wants to make decisions about the future. Give this activist some female pacifists to calm him down. At the age of 15, he's supposed to chase girls, not the city hall. Or I hope that it's not going to reproduce, talking about the Alžbětko, for example. And then we have the albaism and sanism questioning mental health, which was also very common. So very often, for example, even the sexual orientation, they question sexual orientation of youth activists who have never said anything about their sexual orientation, and most probably they never heterosexuals, but they were calling them, for example, as gay and so on. Which can be something that answers the question when you talk about Maria, that actually many people can be have harassed about our sexual orientation without actually having any differing sexual orientation, but they can just be used against the way to exclude them from the public discourse. And this is similar with mental health. They, for example, what a weirdo, a clear cuckoo who somehow slipped out of the mental institution. I don't really get that Czech Radio Plus conducts an interview with one of those retarded morons. Next slide, please. And then if we look at the combined data from ethnography and Q studies, so what was interesting that we also found that the youth that we researched with had really developed coping mechanism for dealing with this online hatred and hatred in general. So one of the coping mechanisms they developed and applied was using humor. So, for example, green communist, go hang yourself. And the person laughed. So typical. We, as a youth movement, got in on Facebook. So we looked at it. So what are we going to do with it? Someone wishes a death to us. We shouldn't. It's just, well, he probably has a complex or something, so he has to deal with it. I guess that's it. And the person was laughing again. Then they were developing and applying rationalization. So they were trying to rationalize how to work with this hate and issues they were dealing with. So, for example, it certainly isn't pleasant, but at the same time, it's important to realize that what we see in the comments is terribly basic. So don't take it too seriously. But if someone comes there to online space with a real objection, and if a meaningful discussion starts there, then it certainly makes sense to pay attention to it, and it's great. So they were sometimes even welcoming the different opinions, unless it wasn't, of course, in this hateful way. And then even funny and common rationalization was negative comments means that we reached out of our green bubble or in any other bubble, depending on what the topic was of their activism. So actually reaching out of the bubble and reaching to people who actually can have different opinions and even express hate towards them could have been by some of the youth activists perceived as actually a good sign of that they're reaching out. Then also very important was peer support. And again, this is interesting connecting to Maria research when she said that the parents and caregivers, parents and adults, were not aware of their cyber hate. It's similar to our research, which I don't have it here, but the youth activists that we talked about all agreed that they do not seek adult support, that they seek and have peer support, and it's usually the other youth activists, and that it's extremely important to them, and social media played a huge role in this, that they could develop their communities, maintain their communities, talk to individual people 24/7 if they experience some anxieties from cyber hate or other issues around connected to this. So peer support, I think it's important for people who think about an important issue to be surrounded by people who think the same way and who can help each other. Some saw it also as a way of self-development. I also don't feel any need to fight for my opinion in any way. It's more useful to put that time into something else. So they were reflecting the change. In the beginning, they, for example, sort of defending themselves, but then they stopped and just completely, for example, stopped paying attention to it and focus on different things. And then any confrontation with people helps me to develop my arguments. So if they decided to be engaged and interact, they said, like some of them also said as a way of self-development. And then digital literacy, most of the activists that we talk about reflected they feel that they have higher digital literacy skills than it's probably common within their other youth and children. And this was also developed, especially thanks to their being involved in youth activism. And they said, for example, now I open my social media filled with things I really care about, and the space is very accepting. It's like funny, positive, it's very feminist. The whole algorithm reflects how I want the world to be. So they used algorithms and different ways of how to adjust the social media and their internet in a way that would be comfortable and helpful for them. Next slide, please. However, that I also would like to mention is that something that we are maybe not paying enough attention to it, although Maria mentioned age, then it probably, I don't know how much it reflected in the follow-up research about cyberhurt and cyberbullying. But if we look at again on the public discourse and things that have been said about youth activists, and we look at it a bit more closely, then we see really that it's intersectional, that very often the age and being young and being part of the youthhood or childhood, it also reflects in the comments. So not only we talk about, for example, that their gender or appearance, but we add things like such as little boy, or some perceptions about what youth should do. Youth shouldn't politically participate. They should play sports, chase girls. And for example, we talk about them as different generation, youth generation. We have perceptions at the age of 15, what they're supposed to do, and talk about them as child, youth. So somehow categorizing them and excluding them based on their age, and that they are perceived as youth and young and children. The next slide. So what was very interesting in our research is that when they talk about the hateful comments, they seem that they already developed a coping strategic and mechanism, and they were as a group and having peer support able to deal with it. And they were talking about it in a funny and reflective way, and not saying really shows of being upset or angry about it. But what they were really upset and angry about was actually how society dismisses them online, how they talk down to them, patronizing them because of their age and being youth and young. So they reflect again the role of youth and children in the whole society. For example, the society does not really work in favor of us with the voting right, the capital, and the overall social status. It's very complicated even for a very capable young person to assert himself in the adult governed world. Adults protest, debate, voice their views, and it seems to be working. So why couldn't it work the same with the youth? What the difference is, really? And when they were very interesting was, for example, how they were problematizing respect. So one of the statements was that we have no respect for adults, because very often what we encountered was that it was talked about youth activists as disrespectful to the society, to adults, to democracy. And all they agree that they do have respect for the adults, sometimes even saying more than they should apparently have, but it's the different way around, that adults do not have respect them. And they said they cannot depend on being respected, and they found it very sad. They said that calling them naive, radical, that all that, it shows that they don't respect them. And even talking about that being attacked, for example, based on the gender, personality, they assume that it's actually often the adults, not the other peers who do that online. And they saw it as some intergenerational problems between the relationship between adults and youth. The next slide, please. Okay, so some concluding and emerging thoughts. So about our research, what I would like to say that especially focus on youth activists that we included in our research, at the end of the day, it really illustrates some success story of digital literacy, youth participation, and even media panics, because the youth activists that we encountered with, they were somehow, although ready, or they knew that probably being youth and active will bring some hatred, some heated arguments. They had their peer support. They knew that this is happening. They worked with it. They coped with it, and they really applied the digital literacy skills even to deal with it. But the issue was then, but what the research did not capture is what Maria was saying, and that's the small percentage. That really does probably, maybe it's not small, but it is possible that what I call the small percentage is those who, for example, do not get politically active. The youth doesn't get politically active because they don't want to deal with this, or those who are being politically active but don't know how to cope with it, or who were active but did not cope. And also, then maybe it's easy for us to focus on the obvious forms, such as discrimination or exclusion based on gender, sexual orientation, but we are sometimes oblivious, and we are not really knowing or focusing on other ways of discriminations or exclusions, such as, for example, on this age and discursive and statements and things that are said online that don't seem so harmful. For example, that this is disrespectful youth, But at the end of the day, this was really something that made the youth activists very angry and very reflective and retrospective, and they found it as disrespectful to them, and they disagree greatly with that. So then the question is how we should reflect on the adult-child and youth power relationships as co-constructed online. If it's something that children should also be and youth should also have as part of the digital and media literacy education, if it's something that we want to talk about, the critical consciousness about their social status and the social construction of childhood, youth, and adulthood, and other topics such as citizenship and political participations, and then what they might encounter, not only because, for example, if they become youth activists. And then all these big topics such as power, respect, participation, what it means to them, what it means to the adults, what it means to the others, and where it all fits in children and youth learning, because everything is interconnected and it's dialogic. And if we talk and think about the use of online and digital media for political participation and among the youth, that it's highly probable if they decide to engage and participate, they will encounter this, and it will be also picking up on their age and youthhood, and they will need to find ways how to deal with it. And it's probably something they haven't thought about so much as about other issues and hates that they might encounter online and encountering. So that's very good for me. Thank you. That's all for me. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Markéta, for sharing the screen. So now this is the last opportunity for us to have any questions. I must say that I understood the activism a little bit different way. You presented, you meant political or civic engagement, why I really only considered those influencing YouTubers that actually bring a good content online, and children follow them because they like to listen to their peers. But anyway, this was very, very interesting. So if anyone from our guests here have questions, please go ahead. No questions? Okay, Markéta, so thank you very much for your time and for your contribution. We have been streaming this presentation and recording it as well, so we will have it online, and very probably we will come back to the presentations for some more insights. You are welcome to stay with us, but I understand the reasons why you couldn't come in person. Those reasons will not let you join us in our next session, but we will continue in a couple of minutes with some practical workshops and conclusions from this conference. So Markéta, thank you very much. Also, Maria, thank you very much for being with us here for this last session of the conference, and hope to meet soon again at some good scientific event, hopefully in the near future. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Have a nice day.
Okay, so the call has been finished, and now we are going to close the live stream as well. And